to talk about numbers anymore. So I said, okay, Puyan, what do you want to talk about? And he said something related to freedom and explaining the slogan of the notion of freedom in the slogan, Women, Life, Freedom, and the distinction between individual and collective freedom in that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good evening. Good evening, everybody. I'm happy to be here with you all in our beautiful city of Amsterdam to discuss this ongoing Iranian revolution. When I was asked to participate in this event, I offered to briefly reflect on the implied meaning of freedom in the Iranian people's call to end the Islamic Republic. On hearing that the event would not be recorded, I asked for 10 minutes of your time and asked the organizers to record what I have to say, which is why I'm giving a sort of separate talk right now. I strongly believe that we must, here in Amsterdam, defend our liberty by speaking frankly and in public. I respect the other panelists' decision to come here in support of the Iranian cause, but to ask not to be recorded. دمتونم گرم. And yet, I also want to say, and we heard this actually in the last panel, that it is public action what sets us free. If we allow them to grab us by the throat, all the way from Tehran, here in Amsterdam, we lose our liberty. But what is azadi, freedom, liberty? Freedom is a subject matter that we cannot reflect on often enough. And ideal democratic citizens must think about and act for if they are to protect and maintain their freedom. These days, for me, as for millions of Iranians in Iran and in diaspora, freedom's meaning is bittersweet, combining a deep sense of loss with the hope of better days to come. I think of Mohammad Maleki, a prominent defender of the cause of freedom in Iran. I think of how he endured torture in the 1980s, how each night he heard tens of fellow prisoners sing before they were taken to the gallows, how just a few years ago, this frail old man stood outside in the rain calling for freedom. Oh, friend, freedom, come, come. How long must we wait? My life is over already. Freedom, come. It's too late for me. I'm waiting here until the final moment for the freedom of the people. Maliki did not live to see this year's uprising, which finally caught up with his honesty that this regime cannot be reformed, that only a revolution can save those who deserve freedom in this life, right now. But even though he didn't experience these days, he knew they would come. The desire for liberty is powerful, timeless. Calls for freedom sound again and again in a process of ever stronger amplification. Freedom cannot be contained forever. Not even the oppressive use of state power can undo human nature, which is to yearn for freedom. To make people confess against themselves too is against human nature. Tyrants who use such excessive violence, raping Iranian prisoners' souls, if not their bodies, only achieve destabilization of the theocratic state they seek to preserve. But what about freedom? What is freedom? What does it mean if everybody calls for her? The southern states of the United States appeal to the freedom of the states in opposition to the federal government with the aim of maintaining slavery. Hitler appealed to the freedom of the German nation to trample on the Treaty of Versailles. The communists stubbornly insisted, even under Stalin, that they were on their way to the kingdom of freedom that Marx had prophesied. And the call for freedom was part of Iran's Islamic Revolution of 1979 too. People chanted back then, Istiqlal, Azadi, Jumhuriye Islami. Independence, freedom, Islamic Republic. Independence of foreign powers. Freedom not as a liberal concept, but the freedom to be free from the authoritarian power of the Shah, the king, and his secret police. An Islamic Republic, the very idea of an Islamic Republic functioned to deceive a people that hardly understood what this oxymoron meant. The Iranian Nobel Peace Laureate Shirin Ebadi was recently asked what her generation lacked at that time. Aql, she said. Understanding. Freedom without understanding, without thinking, without listening to one's conscience. Freedom without caring for others is freedom's undoing. Here in Amsterdam, a statue of the philosopher Spinoza placed in front of the city hall reminds all that, to quote the Enlightenment philosopher, the purpose of the state is freedom. Freedom is a fundamental concept in Spinoza's philosophy. It ties the individual's power to act with political freedom. And Spinoza sees a mutual dependence between these individual and collective political levels. A citizen can only be free in a free state. And a free state is only possible when its citizens are free. Of course, we can also find in Spinoza's books reasonings that contradict our understanding of freedom. For example, Spinoza's thought, unfortunately, that women do not belong in politics. But if we understand him as a representative of the Enlightenment, a time in which thoughts about freedom flourished abundantly, a charitable reading of Spinoza can still inspire men and women and even move them to act far beyond Western Europe. His criticism of religion inspired, for example, Brazilian intellectuals who in the 1960s resisted dictatorship and opposed religious authorities that instrumentalized superstitions to subjugate the people. And today, Spinoza is, in fact, a symbol of freedom in Iran. His book, his famous, notorious book, the Tractatus Theologico-Politicus, the Theological Political Treatise, is translated into Persian. The fourth print was published in Tehran in 2019. For a people that yearn for freedom and seek to escape the clutches of violent religious authorities, those ultimate barbarians, Spinoza is the ultimate hero. And just as in Spinoza's thought, in the Iran of today, individual liberty is inextricably linked to the democratic freedom of all. In her book, Freedom and Unruly History, a book about the history of freedom from Greek and Persian antiquity to the French and American revolutions, Anneline de Dijn defines individual freedom as the possessing of inalienable individual rights. Rights that mark a private domain which no government or ruler may infringe. De Dijn explains that this is a modern and liberal ideal. Throughout history, however, she argues, democratic freedom, the freedom of a collective to rule itself, has been of much greater importance. To be free in this view is to resist the enslavement of one's people. Think of resistance against a government that is seen as illegitimate, or against a foreign occupier, as in Ukraine. Both freedoms, individual and collective, are fought for in the Iran of today. This time, the people chant, Zan, Zendegi, Azadi, woman, life, liberty. Woman, because women demand that the religious authorities and the state leave them alone. Life, in stark contrast to the revolutionary Shia cult of death, the desire of young and old, who want to live life to the fullest, who want to enjoy each other and to enjoy the world. And freedom, this time, freedom of a people to rule itself, and the freedom of individuals who do not want to be what the Ayatollahs want them to be. Now, I happened some weeks ago to speak with Jonathan Israel, a historian of Spinoza, the Enlightenment, and democratic revolutions. I asked him, is it true that we are witnessing the first time in humankind's history that an entire country calls for regime change for the sake of women's rights? He responded with careful enthusiasm, the kind when you realize something profound, saying that indeed he couldn't think of any other such example. So, the Iranian women are writing an entire new chapter beyond Iran in the unruly history of freedom. In times when authoritarian nationalism and religious fundamentalism threaten us once more, they keep our hope for freedom alive. And let us hope that our hope wins in the end. Thank you.